there with that.
Let me get this out of there. Here, put that in there again. Okay.
All right. Put it back in there. And I'll adjust for you.
Or are we going to the arena next time?
There you go.
Tonight's program will begin shortly, but in the meantime, if you'd remember to please silence your cell phones at this time. And again, the program will begin momentarily.
So we'll start in 4 more minutes. I'll give you a signal that we're starting, okay? Just like I do Boucher.
Okay.
I won't let him know that you're going to try to take over his job.
That's it? That's it for notes?
Isn't that enough? We'll try not to spill it.
Did you want to put it under there? Yeah, I can grab it if we need it.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
You know what really makes me angry? People ask me what really makes me angry.
But I think it'll come out anyhow.
There's a question, what really makes me angry?
Saw that.
When people ask me that.
They got your number.
Yeah. What? I know. I shouldn't say anything terrible.
Don't say anything about any of these people.
Do we save a seat for?
Well, good evening, and thanks so much to everyone for being here, and looking forward to some thoughtful remarks from a number of people to help set the stage for tonight's event. I'm Mitch Tyke. I'm the executive producer of Lake Effect at WUWM, Milwaukee Public Radio. It is a wonderful audience we have here this evening, and because it is such a wonderful audience in the room, we want to make this as interesting and useful to you as we can. So you should have index cards at your places. Feel free to write questions that you'd like either Mr. Habush or Mr. Chandler to address. We will collect those over the course of the evening and work in as many as we can as the conversation goes on. Just to frame how the evening will take place, Kurt Chandler has chosen a handful of moments from this book that he believes are especially poignant and emblematic of Bob Habush's career. And we'll chat about each of those cases and how they fit into the complex tapestry that comprises a lifetime in the courtroom. But before we get to those, we have three distinguished hosts for tonight's program who will each say a few words. We're joined tonight by Joseph Kearney, the Dean of the Marquette University Law School, Mark Shapiro, Executive Director of the Jewish Community Center, and Hannah Rosenthal, Executive Director of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. Dean Joseph Kearney leads off for us.
Thank you, Mitch, and welcome to everyone. A good number of you are Marquette law students and thus well familiar with Eckstein Hall and even this appellate courtroom, and some others are frequent guests at our events, but still others are individuals who have not been with us before. It is a great privilege for me as Dean to welcome all of you, and I want to begin by thanking our various partners in the Jewish community for their leadership in putting this event together. Bob Habush is a great lawyer. Marquette Law School can claim, at most, only indirect credit for this. While Bob is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, his father, Jesse Habush, was a Marquette lawyer. The extent of any direct connection is no matter, and I would say this even if Mr. Habush were not a longtime generous benefactor of Marquette Law School, as well as of his own alma mater. That is, at Marquette Law School, we have an interest in celebrating excellence in the legal profession, especially here in our hometown, whatever the particular school attended. And to say that Bob has excelled in the legal profession would be an understatement. For more than 50 years, Bob has been among the very best trial lawyers in the country, not just Milwaukee and Wisconsin. He has represented injured plaintiffs and led them through the civil justice system to vindicate their rights. This is how society wants these disputes resolved, but it is most difficult work. Among many other things, it requires knowledge, tenacity, even stubbornness, and great art. Bob continues to be among the very best trial lawyers, and I can attest from personal experience on the other side, maybe even on the losing side on my part, he's pretty good in the appellate courtroom too. But Bob Habush is also a great man. While some of that is bound up in his professional work, to which I have already alluded, I refer also to his roles in our communities, whether the Jewish community or the larger life of this region. No doubt the coming conversation will focus on the professional activities, but I hope that whether in this conversation or in the magnificent book, you will get this larger sense as well. That is especially so for our students. In hearing about Bob Habush, you will be learning about some of the possibilities available to lawyers in our society. I very warmly commend to you this evening's example. Thank you. Mark?
Knowing that I was going to be following the dean, I decided not to write notes because I don't want to in any way try and pretend as though I'm capable of the same level of speech. But for a few moments, I would like to recognize a slightly different Bob Habush than the one that we talk about in this book. And that is to recognize him as a member of our community, but also in a moment of just looking at the front row, which is to be a father and a husband and a grandfather and someone who cares so much about community. About when there are times that there is the wrong wrong being done, legal and not legal, a moral wrong, the first person to step up, and I promise you that the village of Whitefish Bay will they will always remember what it means to maybe not take the high road. Then when they found out they were going to be fighting against Bob Habush, we now stand with 150,000 square foot centerpiece of our Jewish community in Whitefish Bay. The title, Courtroom Avenger. When we first started talking about this event, because I spend much of my day surrounded by young children in our early childhood program, the word Avenger stuck with me. So I asked some of our kids what they thought the book Courtroom Avenger was about, and immediately became a superhero with a cape flying behind him. Now, Bob, slow down. I know the word superhero probably excites you very much. But we actually are planning on taking Bob down to talk about what it means to be an Avenger. Truly what it means to be somebody who watches out for the person who wrong was done to. And this book tells a story, but it's great to see it through the eyes of kids. We are blessed to have the Habush family and Bob and his wife and his entire family be supporters of our community. We congratulate you on an amazing book, and we welcome you all tonight to hear a really wonderful story about a really wonderful fight. Keep avenging. Hannah?
Well, I want to add a few words of welcome on behalf of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. We love our partnerships that we've been able to have with Marquette. Fabulous partnership, always substantive on issues that are so important to the community. Bob and Mimi have been very generous philanthropists in the community, to the school, to the JCC, to the Federation, and all of our agencies. And so, in addition to your tenacity, I have to make a remark about your incredible generosity. As all of you know, Bob is also nationally recognized as a major litigator. And his personal story and his track record point to an amazing man of conviction. Pun intended. A philanthropic man for the downtrodden, and a man who you definitely want on your side. We're proud to be part of this event, and we're proud to also introduce Mitch. Mitch Teich is one of the best interviewers I've ever listened to and been interviewed by, and I'm so pleased you will be leading this conversation. Thank you all for being here.
And I will say that the secret to good interviews is really good guests. Well, so I wanted to start this conversation with a big question for Kurt Chandler, who is essentially going to start this conversation. Bob has had a long and extremely busy career. How did you approach writing this book? It is a lot to condense into a couple hundred pages.
Well, the conception of this book started in Bob's office, not surprisingly. I was introduced to Bob by Carl Miller of Miller Communications. Carl's here tonight. And within 5 minutes, I knew there was a story here to tell. Bob started talking about his life as an attorney, and he was bringing details to cases that went back 30, 40, 50 years. He had a terrific recall. He was a great storyteller, but he also was a man of conviction, to use your pun, Hannah. He told me, I asked him, so what motivates you, Bob? And that's what I look for when I write about people, whether they're magazine profiles or biographies, autobiographies. And he told me that it really was anger at the very basis of his motivation. When he was a kid, you know, he was an outsider and he was picked on. He was one of the few Jews in his hometown of Whitefish Bay, and one of the few Jewish students at his school, and he was bullied and he got into scraps, but he fought back. And that was sort of the basis of his character and his personality as a avenger. He wanted to get even. And that grew into, I think, a very admirable role as he became a lawyer. So that story really was laid out in this first meeting, and I thought, yeah, there's a story here. It's a complex story, and it could make a great book. So I was sort of sold right from the start.
Do you think you have to understand certain things about Bob Habush's life before his legal career even started, that in order to help us understand what the legal career has been about? I mean, I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. And like I say, he had very good recall. So at times I felt like I was a stenographer. I was just taking notes of things Bob had to say about his life at age 8. I don't know how many of you can go back to age 8 in your life, but Bob certainly could, and he could with very vivid detail. That, made my life and my job as a writer, I think, quite easy in this case. All right, maybe not easy, but, a challenge, and pieces fit together.
Well, and Bob, we're going to talk about some of the specific cases here in just a moment, but let me ask you this. When you go to trial, your job is to put your client's story front and center. How are you with having your own story front and center like this?
Bizarre. Very few people get a chance to sit down and go back in time. The opportunity that Kurt gave me allowed me to do this, and I was able to go back to when I was 4 years old. When my first best friend, Norman Schechterly, who I played with every day, would not allow me into his house because I was Jewish. That was my first experience with anti-Semitism at 4 years old, and his brother said, "We won't let this Jewish boy in the house." That's where it started, and then it just accelerated with a bunch of kids who thought that I was a good target. They found out that was a mistake. And so I started off feeling different and angry. And I would say that I started having a chip on my shoulder, which over the years got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, until it was the size of the state of Utah. And that just carried forward through high school and college. My only salvation was Mimi. She was able to teach me compassion, love, patience. Otherwise, I might not have ended up as well as I've ended up. She's the rudder on my ship. She always has been. So everything was going great, and I really had no idea how to be a litigator. I had an accounting degree. I thought I'd be a business lawyer. And then while I was in law school, our firstborn got a vaccination which turned out to be defective and caused severe brain damage. The doctors lied to us, told us, so it's just one of those things, stuff happens. When in fact they knew it was a vaccination which ultimately was recalled from the market after it damaged thousands of children, including our child, who was born normally. Well, you didn't have to throw gasoline on a fire, but if I was pissed off before, now I was really pissed off and angry, and I found through my life I rarely get depressed, I just get angry. And then as serendipity, situation forced us to go back to Milwaukee and work with my father, which is the last place I wanted to go. I did not want to do that, but we did it. We had a support system there for Sherry. And I ended up trying a lot of the cases which I describe as cadavers. They were the worst cases you could ever imagine. I never had anyone with a right-of-way. You know, I lost every case I ever tried in the first year of my practice. That didn't help my disposition much. Came home one day and said to Mimi, I should have gone to med school. I should have gone to med school. You know, I would have been a lousy doctor, believe me. So anyways, that's the background that I was in, and not having a lot of fun. And then the first case dropped in that wasn't a cadaver, called Jack McPhee, which turned my professional life around. It was the beginning of a series of product liability cases over 3 decades. But McPhee started it all, and Kurt will tell you a little bit about McPhee.
Kurt, the McPhee case goes back to the mid-1960s.
Before we get to McPhee, though, I just want to echo on what Bob was saying. He did have this simmering anger that drove him, but he channeled this anger to good use. You know, it evolved really into a quest to right the wrongs. And eventually he took on big industries, big companies, big pharma, big tobacco, the chemical industry, automakers, you know, from Chrysler to Toyota to Volkswagen. And he made changes in product law that are still relevant today. You know, he wouldn't give up. And that rage is still simmering today, but he uses it, I think, in a very positive way. It's channeled. One quote that I'd like to read, which sort of summarizes that channeled anger, is on the book flap, but it pertains so well to this drive, this getting even, this Avenger role that inhabits Bob. So here's his quote. It's a 100-year war. There's not going to be an armistice. There's not going to be a peace treaty. As long as I'm drawing breath, I will get even. I will make them pay. The malpracticing doctors, the defective manufacturers, the companies who sell unsafe products. That's the way I am. There is no forgiveness in my heart. There is no turning the other cheek. There never was and there never will be. It's a strong statement, but I think it goes to his drive and it goes to the motivation that I saw the first time I met Bob Habush.
Well, and the other thing that strikes me, and I do want to get to the Jack McPhee case in just a moment, but there are 16 cases described in this book and then 3 additional pro bono cases that were settled before reaching a jury. But on page 80, it really kind of boggles the mind, the sheer list of changes that have happened as a result of cases that Bob Habush was involved in. It's sort of a question for you, but maybe not.
For me or Bob?
Either one. I mean, it actually plays into one of the questions that we've already gotten from the audience, actually, which is, could you speak to the role that your lawsuits may have played in changing laws, but also society values in the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Well, I think what handed out with you when you came in was a list of products that I personally was involved in, either through trial or settlement. You know, lawyers get a bad rap a lot. Some of it they bring upon themselves through some ugly lawyer advertising. But very few people realize the societal benefit of lawyers like me, and I'm not the only one. There's great lawyers all over the country who do these cases as well, and how they've changed products and saved lives again, again, and again. And so the list of those products which were made safer by litigation, not regulators who go to work for the people they're regulating after they're through with their careers, who are in bed with the people they're regulating, but lawyers who try cases against defective manufacturers. And it's still today, you see the Volkswagen issue, you see General Motors with the ignition situation. It hasn't changed. They will never change. And what happened with me is that I was like Alice coming from Kansas and dropped into Wonderland. All of a sudden, I'm looking at an array of defective products everywhere, on the farms, in the factories, in the house, everywhere. No guards, no warnings, nothing. It was like a child who was going into a candy store and sees all this chocolate on a shelf. All these companies were afraid of safety. It was all profit before safety. And so what a fertile ground I had in those times. And so one after another and after another after another of defective products and defective manufacturers and malpracticing doctors, they all had to be dealt with, and there was only one way to deal with them, is kick their ass in the courtroom. That's the only way they could learn. And after a while, they got tired of losing, and they started making safer products. Actually, we put ourselves out of business. You know, there's safer, lots of safer cars now, and safer products, and warnings, and everything else like that. So that was the environment that I got thrown into, and I relished the opportunity, and there was no settling with me. They had to go to court. They had to be punished. They had to be cross-examined. They had to be torn. And that is what made me happy, and that's what I did.
Well, so let's turn the clock back to 1965, I think it was. Kurt, tell us about the case involving Jack McPhee Jr.
Well, as Bob said, he was working cadavers, working at his father, Jesse Habush's law firm. And one day, his father dropped a case file on his desk. He'd gotten it as a referral from a Chicago lawyer. The case involved a young man named Jack McPhee, who worked in a sawmill near La Crosse. His job was to guide logs from a hydraulic conveyor into a buzzsaw. Let me just read an excerpt from the book. I'll be jumping back and forth to excerpts as we go on here today. The 24-year-old McPhee and his wife Sherry had a 2-year-old child. Sherry was 8 months pregnant with their second. Jack had been on the job at Erickson Hardwoods for just a few weeks, earning a weekly wage of $51 when one day the buzzsaw jammed. Doing what he had done several times before and what he had been instructed to do, McPhee reversed the conveyor, shifted it into neutral, and jumped into the pit to unjam the whirring saw. This time, however, something went terribly wrong. As McPhee cleared the saw with his back to the carriage, the gear lever on the control box suddenly fell out of neutral due to vibration. The carriage lurched forward, striking him in the back and feeding him through the buzzsaw. Both of his legs were severed, the right leg just below the knee and the left all the way to the hip. Clearly, it was a horrible accident. And as Bob looked over the case file, he knew it was a tough case. 7 other lawyers had passed on this case. But Bob was determined. He was a scrappy young lawyer who had honed his trial skills working these cadavers, working these auto accident cases. So he charged headlong into the case with no second attorney and no investigator. It was him. It was all Bob. And rather than target the sawmill, Bob brought a product liability lawsuit against the manufacturer of the hydraulic conveyor, claiming the design was faulty. The case went to trial in federal court before U.S. District Judge James Doyle, the father of former Governor Jim Doyle. Bob delivered a passionate closing argument. I'd like to read an excerpt from that closing. Jack McPhee was fed into the saw blade. This was his argument before the jury. It was a jury trial. Jack McPhee was fed into the saw blade, ladies and gentlemen, by a runaway carriage, which threw him into the revolving saw. The runaway carriage was caused by a drive stick disengaging itself, and this drive stick disengaged itself because of no locking device, which should have been on there. The manufacturer chose not to put it on. Compare, ladies and gentlemen, the responsibility of a manufacturer and distributor who distributes all over the United States. Compare, if you will, a manufacturer who has a research department, who has engineers on the stand, who has troubleshooters that go out to their prospects. Compare, if you will, the manufacturer who knows his products, knows the value, knows its tendency. Compare, if you will, the organization, the sawmill industry. Compare these people and their responsibility for this accident to Jack McPhee, 24 years old, 26 weeks of Sawyer School, doing what he saw others do. Habush won the case. The jury awarded Jack McPhee $650,000. And although he could not repair McPhee's destroyed body, he gave him hope for a future. The verdict finally put an end to the PTSD and Jack's phantom pain that he suffered for years after the accident. I had the opportunity to interview Jack McPhee in 2012, a few months before he passed away from cancer. This is what he told me. Bob was totally aware that I was blaming myself, subconsciously, not consciously, McPhee said. So he said to me, would you rather have all the money in the world or would you rather be pain-free? And I said, oh hell, that's not even fair. I'll take pain-free. So Bob said, this is what the jury gave you, Jack. It gave you not guilty. And as a result of the not guilty verdict, that was the end of my PTSD and the phantom pain. McPhee went on to live a productive life into his 70s. He bought a farm and bought and sold land and cattle. And in 1976, he was elected mayor of Prairie du Chien, a river town in southwestern Wisconsin. Truth is, Jack said, the accident gave me more than it took away, and I don't mean in monetary terms. The status of winning for the right reason, you couldn't take that away. All in all, I personally received a hell of an education out of it. I was represented by an upfront, top-of-the-line attorney, and for the first time in my life, I was given the opportunity to see how to analyze any given situation and go on the offense, to really kick ass. And that's what Bob did in the trial.
Bob Habush, do you see that case the same way? Do you see where it fits into your career?
My favorite case. I've tried over 100 jury trials, including the recent, not so recent, Miller Park, which was a zenith of my career, but Jack McPhee was my favorite case because it was the first one. It launched the career. It was almost impossible to win. I didn't have my wonderful investigator with me, Terry Tadasak. I didn't have my wonderful paralegal, Ken Jarvis. I didn't have a researcher. I had nobody. I just had myself. I had to do it all myself. And I found out I could do it. And so it gave me tremendous confidence and vindication and in a sense, saved his life and turned his life around. So the McPhee case was a pivotal case in my life and in my career to help this young man in a case that no other lawyer wanted, which made it even better and sweeter for me. And from that, I don't know if you folks can believe this, but that was the first products liability case for an individual in Wisconsin's history. All the products liability cases in Wisconsin were for products. I remember one case where minks got poisoned by feed. This was the first personal injury products liability case, and the word got around Wisconsin, and I started getting all these cases referred to me, product liability cases, where lawyers recognized something went wrong. So it launched the career. McPhee's the case that launched the career.
Well, and we heard what that case meant to Jack McPhee's life from that point on. When it comes to what you get out of a case like this, how much of it is punishing the wrongdoer? How much of it is a monetary reward for your client? And how much of it is making your client whole in some way?
All of the above. Vindication, revenge, helping someone who needs help. It's all rolled into one. You know, the funny thing about trying cases, and the people in this room who've tried cases, is that after the case is over, even if you win, you go into some kind of funk because the adrenaline is gone, and it takes a while to get out of that funk. Of course, I had someone to get me out of the funk real quick, Mimi. Enough, she says, enough. She gave me about 24 hours. So that was, so that's the answer to your question, Mitch.
Well, there's another case that seems especially important to discuss, given that the defendant has been back in the news recently for other legal reasons. Kurt Chandler, tell us about Larry Totsky versus Volkswagen.
Well, as I said, this was a pivotal case, and it really established Bob as a trial lawyer with talent, brains, and a lot of nerve. The Totsky versus Volkswagen was a fascinating case. It almost reads like a mystery to me. A young man named Larry Totsky had been drinking one night and driving. He was driving his way home, and he was on the Zoo interchange in his 1970 Volkswagen Beetle when he lost control and rolled his car. Larry's injuries were severe. He nearly died, and he was left paralyzed, a quadriplegic. Interesting, according to the police report, Larry Totsky told police he couldn't steer the car. Habush had a hunch. His firm's investigators found what was left of the Volkswagen in a salvage lot in Iowa. And with the permission of the court, he and a team of engineers inspected the Beetle, including the car's gearbox. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. Inside the gearbox were tiny fragments of what appeared to be concrete. How the heck did concrete get in the gearbox? Well, Bob and his engineers devised a wild theory. What if the concrete particles somehow got in the steering mechanism when the car was manufactured? What if the concrete bits caused the car's steering to lock up and cause the crash? Habush deposed witnesses in Germany who worked in the VW plant when the Beetle was on the assembly line. The deposition showed that the gearboxes were open on the line until the very last step, Habush says. The gears were installed, the grease was put in, and along it went down the line until lastly the cover was put on. In the depositions, Habush questioned the German witnesses about the assembly facility itself. When was it built? What was its square footage? How was the assembly line laid out? What about the ceiling, he asked. Do you know what the ceiling was made of? Yes, sir. Concrete, one of the witnesses replied. And suddenly Habush had the smoking gun.
That case, when it came in, I screened it with my partners, and I said, what are you, nuts? I mean, here's a kid who had a fight with his wife. He went to a tavern. He belted down a few. He's driving down the freeway, and he loses control of his Volkswagen. He gets thrown out of the car, thus probably not wearing his seatbelt. You know, where are you going with this? I don't know. There's a concept in the law called excited utterance. And excited utterance is an exception to the hearsay rule, which disallows any out-of-court testimony by somebody, especially when it helps the person, and it's excluded generally. But when it's given at a scene of an accident, when it's spontaneously elicited right at the moment someone is hurt or someone else is hurt, it has credibility, and the court allows that in to evidence as admissible, an exception to the hearsay rule, which is exclusionary. And here in the police report, the kid, while he's lying on the ground thinking he may die, I couldn't steer. Now, to me, that was enough for me to go ahead and have the steering gearbox examined. And, of course, Volkswagen went nuts. German manufacturers, someone's accusing them of putting concrete in their steering gearbox. Of course, now we know from Volkswagen they think they can do bad things. But they went crazy with their engineers, and they poured all kinds of money and engineers to testify against it, and they even destroyed my concrete steering, the little pebble of concrete during their examinations. So anyways, that was a pivotal case, a case that most lawyers, and probably today I wouldn't even take. But in those days, hell, I wasn't taking anything, and this looked like, who knows, you know. And of course, as usual, I got no offer, and it went to verdict, and I think it was at that time a very large verdict for Wisconsin. It would have been in the 70s. I think it was 1.8 million.
Well, let me read from your closing arguments, because
Go ahead.
for those who have seen Bob in trial, or those who know about him in trial, he has this stare, and it works very well to put the defense lawyers on notice. But he also works a jury really well. And here's testament to how he argues and pleads his case before a jury. This is from his closing argument. Physiologically, Larry Trotsky is now a totally dependent man as compared to what he was before. What does it mean to a man to have your wife put your clothes on for you? What does it mean to a man who has trouble tying his shoes? What does it mean to have the tube attached to your bladder and cleaned every day by your wife? He can't stand, and he can't even sit. What does it mean to look at your lifeless legs and see them jumping up and down in spasms and not being able to control them? We take so much for granted. What does it mean to just stand up and stretch? What does it mean to walk, to run, to take pride in a job, to be able to roll on the floor with a little child, to take a walk with your wife, to walk down the aisle in the future with your daughter, to hug and dance and enjoy yourself? Ladies and gentlemen, this man has lost all of those things that you and I don't even think about. He is a prisoner in that wheelchair for the rest of his life. A very compelling closing argument, and as Bob mentioned, the verdict was a record verdict in Wisconsin at the time, $1.3 million. This was January 1975. Bob Habush was on a roll. He had made a name.
Well, and I want to call some attention to the language that you used in that closing argument, because it speaks to your approach to something called the golden rule in court, correct?
Yeah, lawyers are not allowed to say to a jury, how would you feel if this happened to you? That's a violation of what they call the golden rule. It's grounds for mistrial. It's grounds for reversal on appeal. So my technique was never to do that, of course, but to ask rhetorical questions. And what does it mean, his? What does this mean here? What does this mean? Always on a same rhythm, going through all the various problems this man has. What does this mean? And of course, you're asking the jury to think, what does this mean? You're not saying, how would you feel if it happened to you? But you're talking about it in the third person. And so you're accomplishing the same thing without violating that rule. One point is that, you know, when you're a victim, as my wife and I, of a defective product, or whether it's a drunk driver, if you survive it, you develop a tremendous compassion and empathy. And so one of the ingredients I was able to carry forward with these people who were terribly hurt was empathy. I could understand without pretending, without acting, what they were going through. You know, I don't know if I represented a parent that lost a child or a damaged child. I didn't have to stretch. I knew what they were going through. And so the sincerity goes through to the jury. They know that you mean what you say, that you feel it. And there are many times I felt myself almost tearing up during final arguments because I was reliving my own experience through the experience of the client. And juries can see that and appreciate that. They can sense that.
How much do you script a closing argument like that, and how much comes off the cuff, and how much do you feel it as you deliver it?
I start writing my final argument the first day of trial, mostly on napkins in restaurants. Terry's shaking his head, he knows that. So my best final arguments were on napkins in restaurants. So it's not off the cuff. I don't believe in off the cuff. I believe in preparation. And for the law students here, you don't do anything off the cuff. You prepare, you prepare, you prepare. And you don't have a fear of losing. You can't be a trial lawyer if you have a fear of losing. You can't have that. And you've got to be relentless, and you've got to be passionate and prepared. And so my final arguments were all laid out, you know, and I would even have notes up on the podium, but I would rarely look at them. It was a security blanket for me. So you can't persuade a jury by reading to them. You got to look at them. You got to engage them, eye to eye, every one of them. I'd look at every one of those jurors, each one, and I'd go and I'd sweep back and forth between the jurors. They know that they were important to me, every one of them. And that's what good trial lawyers do.
You're kind of doing it now, aren't you?
I think so.
Now, don't forget that as you have questions, please write them down on the index cards provided, and I hope there's someone that's sweeping the aisles to pick up some of those cards. But to move along for a moment, Volkswagen, of course, was an international brand with its particular reputation. But another case that is featured in this book is a much more local name, which to that point had essentially a sterling reputation. Kurt Chandler, what is important about the case of John Carroll versus the Blood Center of southeastern Wisconsin?
Well, it really was a landmark case because of the time period. This was 1985, and the AIDS epidemic was in its early stages. And the nation's blood supply was still at risk. There were not enough safeguards in the mid-'80s to detect tainted blood or blood products that might be tainted with the HIV virus, the antibody. A man named John Carroll, who was 60 years old and a World War II vet, came to Bob's office one day looking for help. He was happily married for 40 years with 2 grown children, a good income running an insurance agency. He was a swimmer, a bicyclist, and a hiker, and although he had a heart bypass, it slowed him down a bit, but he was in good health. He and his wife Sandy had plans to retire to a cabin in the North Woods one day. But after his bypass surgery, John Carroll got a call from his doctor. He had been given a blood product to stop bleeding, and the product contained blood from many donors, including one who had HIV. The doctor called John right away with the news. John, his doctor said, I think it would be best if you got tested for AIDS. John Carroll was numb. How could this happen? Carroll hired Bob Habush to find out, and Bob tracked down the blood product used in John's transfusion to the Blood Center of southeastern Wisconsin, the largest blood bank in the state at the time. The center supplied Milwaukee's hospitals with blood. Habush and his team began investigating. They found that on March 2nd, 1985, the FDA approved a blood test to screen donors for the AIDS antibody. The blood center began using the test kits on March 7th, 5 days after the FDA ruling. But the donor whose blood had infected Carroll had donated the blood on March 6th, 1 day earlier. It went undetected and untested to St. Joe's Hospital in Milwaukee. Records Habush obtained found the blood center had shipped untested blood and did not replace any untested blood at St. Joe's until the very end of April, 2 months late, two months after the FDA's regulation came down. John Carroll's surgery was April 23rd. Bob argued that the blood center was culpable, and after preparing for a year and a half, the case went to trial. John Carroll took the stand, pale and gaunt. This is what John Carroll testified. I truly expect I will die within a year. I feel like I'm rolling down a hill and I can't stop myself. He had sold his insurance agency, stopped exercising, and abandoned his dream of retiring northern Wisconsin. His life had become a constant battle against painful, opportunistic diseases like pneumocystic pneumonia and a daily regimen of medications. I feel like I'm turning into a skeleton, he said, noting that he had lost 2 pounds a week. I'm ashamed of myself. I'm so weak. Before leaving the witness stand, he recited for the jury a passage from the Bible, Psalm 38. I am stooped and bowed down profoundly. All the day I go in mourning, for my loins are filled with burning pain. There is no health in my flesh. I am numbed and severely crushed, and I roar with anguish of heart.
Well, he comes in the office, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm saying, he's not a drug user. He's not out with prostitutes. I mean, this is an insurance guy with a family, and he's got AIDS. And when I found out that the famed and well-known and respected blood center had decided to unload their untested blood off their inventory before they shipped the tested blood because they wanted to get rid of product, well, that fit right into my sweet spot.
Got a little angry?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The heart rate went up, and I said, we're going to get these guys. And we sued them. They had never been sued before. They brought in the heads of blood centers from all over the country, Detroit, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, to justify their stupidity. I had a hell of a field day cross-examining these people. As a matter of fact, Mimi was there. I was cross-examining one of their doctors, and I usually start off very quietly and very nice, just, be nice to them before I cut their head off. And during a recess, she says, Bob, why are you being so nice to this guy? I said, wait. In any event, it was a terrible, terrible tragedy, and as he did die a short time after the trial, but at least his wife and he had some vindication. And it did send a message to the blood centers around the country. You just don't do stuff like that. You just don't put people's lives at risk because you want to get rid of product. And it was written up in the Saturday Evening Post nationally. It made national news, and hopefully it did change some practices in the blood center. But it was a sad, sad case. I had a hard time getting through that final argument. And of course, I cited the psalm that he cited, that he testified to, and there wasn't a dry eye in the jury during that final argument.
We have a question, but I fear you've answered it already, and that is, what makes you really angry?
When people ask me what makes me really angry.
But with that in mind, if you have a question on an index card, if you'd hold up the index card right now so we can have somebody pick them up, and just keep them, either slide them to the end, or we'll get them all to the front. But in the meantime, another case with a particular local significance has a lasting impact today, if I remember correctly, and it is a case that bears talking about tonight. Kurt, what should we take from the case of the JCC versus the Village of Whitefish Bay as it pertains to Bob Habush's career?
Bob could not only be an angry man, but an impatient man. And after a point, many of you know the story of the JCC's expansion and the fight it had with the village of Whitefish Bay, but it dragged on and dragged on until finally Bob decided, damn it, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to kick some ass. But let me give you a little background on this for those of you who are not familiar with the case. This was in Bob's hometown, remember. Places where he was bullied and experienced anti-Semitism from the age of 4 and on. The case involved the Milwaukee Jewish Federation and Jewish Community Center in the village of Whitefish Bay. The Federation owns land on Santa Monica Boulevard that makes up the Carl campus. The JCC anchors that campus, and experiencing growing pains in the early 2000s, proposed expanding its facility. The plan, however, was met with angry protests by neighbors. Yard signs went up instantly. Stop the expansion. Stop the JCC. Members of the village board dragged their feet, reluctant to approve the original plan, calling for downsizing of the expansion. The JCC complied, but the level of acrimony divided the community of Whitefish Bay and unleashed an ugly tone of anti-Semitism. Katie Pritchard was elected village president in the midst of this anti-JCC campaign. She kept a journal of the anti-JCC comments, and I'd like to read what she wrote in her journal. To me, what made it terrible was the presence of pretty blatant anti-Semitism, she said. When you work with people on tough issues, you always have some irrational personal conflicts. You have people that aren't basing things on facts, and you have different perceptions with different opinions. But when you add the anti-Semitism, it's a whole different hurtful thing. People would come to speak at public meetings, and they'd talk about this shockingly and unabashedly. They'd say, hello, my name is so-and-so, and I live at such and such, and I don't think we need any Jews here. That blatant. Some would say, these are not Whitefish Bay Jews, these are Mequon Jews who are going to be coming here. One person said, imagine if the Fox Bay Theater was filled with Jews. People wouldn't want that in their neighborhood. It was just unbelievable. The attacks got personal. There were people who went through my campaign list and said, anybody who gives that's Jewish must be motivated by your vote for the JCC. The opponents wanted to disqualify me from the board because I had worked at United Way, and United Way gave money to the JCC. After me, they tried to disqualify Paul Matthews, who was on the Planning Commission because he's president of the Marcus Center for the Performing Arts, which was funded by the Marcuses, a Jewish family. And they tried to disqualify Commissioner Mark Huber because he works at Aurora Healthcare, and Aurora provides a sports medicine for the JCC. It had turned ugly, truly ugly. Bob had sat on the Federation board, and you know, he doesn't like bullies. He was getting fed up with the neighbors, and he was getting angry at the foot dragging and at the anti-Semitic slurs. So he decided to take the case on. He sat down with the village of Whitefish Bay's insurer, and he had a very frank discussion with that insurer. So what's the story, Habush asked. Well, can we work something out, said the insurance attorney. No, I don't think so, Habush said, staring hard at the man across from him. Your people have gone too far. You're being influenced by a bunch of anti-Semites, and I don't like it. It's got to stop. I don't know if you know me, Habush says, but I'm a pretty good trial attorney. And when I'm pissed off, I'm really good. And I am pissed off. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to prepare subpoenas for every one of those yokels who live around here, and I'm going to subpoena them all to a deposition. I'm going to ask them questions like, did you send out letters disparaging the Jewish Community Center? How do you feel about the Jewish Community Center? How do you feel about Jews? And I will tear them a new asshole. Bob's word, not mine. Well, you won't do that, the insurer said. Oh, I won't? Watch me. And he did.
Yeah, that was a labor of love. We attended their meetings. We sat in the front row with a court reporter, took all their statements down on the court reporter. I gave them my best glare, everyone on that board. I worked with Bruce Block, who's a real estate lawyer, who had been on the case with another lawyer who, frankly, they had been pulling his chain and for about a year, gotten nowhere. I took this case on pro bono. I charged no fee for my services. How could I charge a fee for something I loved doing? And anyways, it got done, and they finally approved it. One of the interesting aspects of it, Carl Miller told me some time ago that I had no understanding of or I never knew about, and that was that in order to settle the case, we had to arrange for a road to go out of the JCC onto Port Washington Road to take the traffic off of Santa Monica, and that really was a great deal maker. In addition to not wanting to go to depositions. And what happened, and I didn't know this, is that Port Glendale could say no, and they said, no, we're not going to allow that road from the JCC to go to Port Washington Road. They had the ability to say that, I guess. So I called Frank Busalaki, who I'd become a good friend with during the Miller Park case. He was now Secretary of Transportation, state of Wisconsin. I said, Frank, I need a favor. What? I need you to get Glendale to approve a road out to Port Washington Road. He says, what, are you kidding me? I said, Frank, come on. You can do it. You're the Secretary of Transportation. You tell him to do it. Well, unbeknownst to me, he then calls Carl Miller, who is representing, I think, Whitefish Bay at that time? Glendale, rather. And Glendale, of course, wants to build the shopping center, Bayshore. And they want a ramp to go from 43 down to the shopping center, which is really good. And, of course, they anticipate that Whitefish Bay is going to fight them like they fight everybody. And they're going to fight the ramp. They're going to fight everything. So Carl gets on the phone with Frank, and Frank says, you got to get Bob off my back, you know. You've got to get Glendale to give them the road out to Port Washington Road. And Carl says, all right, you get me the damn ramp. Okay. So Frank gets Bayshore their ramp. The JCC gets their road. Bayshore is a huge success. The JCC is a huge success. And I didn't know any of this was happening. It's a great story.
Well, and that actually sparks a question that we've gotten from the audience. This case notwithstanding, how do pro bono cases end up on your desk, and how do you decide whether to take them on?
Well, that's easy. I had a young woman call and ask to see me, and she came into my office. She told me that she had been sexually molested by her high school coach and religious teacher at a Catholic high school. And she had been sexually abused, and that he had sexually abused others, that she couldn't recover. She had had psychological help. She was on drugs. She was an alcoholic, and she tried to kill herself. And she told me the 3 lawyers had turned her down because the statute of limitations had run on the school, which is true. It had run on the school, and I saw all kinds of complicity among the school. They knew this guy was taking the prettiest girls into class after hours. He was on the bus with them. He would dance with them at school dances. All the signs were there for the school people to understand this guy was a problem. They did nothing. One of the other girls turned him in, and he was arrested and sent to prison. But here's this wreck of a young woman. I said, well, I have a particular adversity to sexual abusers, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to sue that son of a bitch. He's out of prison now. I don't care if we get a nickel. We're going to put him through the paces. Okay? I'll do this for nothing for you. I don't know. We're probably never going to get a dime. I'm also going to figure out a way to sue the school. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll figure out some way. And it turns out that there is a statute of limitations which is expanded for sexual predators, where you can sue longer than the usual. So my theory was the school was in complicity, that he was an agent of the school. And so the school would be brought in under the statute of limitations that allowed us to sue the school. So I sent a letter to the school, and we sued the school, and we sued the guy who's now working as a car salesman. But before I did all that, I said to this young woman, I said, look, I'm not going to represent a corpse. You either clean up your act, or I'm not going to represent you. You get off booze, you get off drugs, you forget about killing yourself, because I'm not going to represent you. You clean your act up, you come back in 6 weeks, and if you're clean, and you're off of drugs, and you're off of booze, and you've given up the thought of killing yourself, then we'll do something. And she came back, said, no more drinking, no more drugs, I want you to represent me. So I subpoenaed the school principal, put him through his paces. It wasn't a fun day for him. And then I got the predator at a deposition, and I was really pissed. I just ripped him up and down and back and forth, and I got him to say certain things that Kurt's going to tell you that absolutely cured this young woman of her guilt that caused all the blaming herself, which a lot of sexual abuse victims do. They blame themselves. Why didn't I fight harder? Why didn't I go away? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? So I got him to say at his deposition, and Kurt will read it to you. And before I read it to you, I want you to know the young woman is married, has 2 children, and is a registered nurse. So another life saved. Go ahead, Kurt.
This is from the deposition. So Bob asked a series of questions, of course, leading up to the killer questions. So he asked, did you know that these young women were vulnerable? Yes, he answered. Did you attempt to become friends with them in order for you to be able to fulfill some of your sexual fantasies? Yes. Was that wrong? Very wrong. They weren't at fault, were they? No. They didn't do anything to encourage you? No. And would you agree that they shouldn't feel guilty about this? Either one of these girls? Yes. And you take full and total responsibility for what happened? 100%. And if she feels some guilt and shame about it, you wouldn't tell her? You would tell her don't? Yes. Were you ever bothered by the fact that you were the religious instructor and you were committing criminal acts upon minors? Yes. It bothered you a lot? Yes. It didn't stop you, though, did it? No.
Well, when she read that...
Yeah, this was closure for her. Yeah. I mean, there was a monetary settlement that was negotiated, but this was what the woman needed to hear.
Absolutely. And she wrote me a beautiful letter, which I still have hanging on the wall in my office.
I have an excerpt from that, too.
Do you have that handy?
This is what...
This is one of the nicest things a client ever said to me.
I'll read part of it. She sent Bob this email, and she said, until I met you, I really didn't have anyone on my side. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, and you taught me slowly but surely how to really live my life. You gave me my life back. I just needed a little kick in the ass. Okay, maybe a big kick in the ass. So thanks. You will forever be a hero of mine.
That's what it's all about.
I feel like I should read this card as well because it speaks directly to that, and I don't know who in the audience wrote it, but he or she said, do you know or realize the continual thanks and gratitude felt by individuals that you've represented? And this person says, I'm here to say thank you. You've helped me to have a comfortable life after serious injury and extensive recovery. I was not supposed to live. I'm living today with thanks and gratitude to you.
Thank you, Therese.
I don't recognize handwriting, that's all. Now, probably the case that the most people might remember and associate with Bob Habush is the case that involved the collapse of a crane during the construction of Miller Park. Kurt Chandler, take it from there. Sorry to throw it at you so quickly.
Got it. Iron worker Jeffrey Wisher let his wife sleep in on the morning of July 14, 1999. Patricia Wisher faithfully would awaken every weekday at 4 a.m. to make her husband an omelet and pack his lunch. 2 sandwiches, a couple pieces of fruit, a bag of chips, and 5 Oreo cookies. But on this particular Wednesday, Wisher slipped out of bed, kissed his wife goodbye, and quietly walked out the door as the sun broke the horizon. Inexplicably, he left behind the gold serpentine chain he usually wore around his neck and his wedding ring. Jeffrey Wisher and his co-workers, William DeGrave and Jerome Starr, didn't come home from work that day. All 3 iron workers died when a giant construction crane nicknamed Big Blue collapsed into the unfinished bowl of what is now Miller Park Stadium. Maybe Jeff Wisher left behind his wedding ring and gold chain because he sensed something awful was going to happen to him on that day. No one knows, no one could know. But he had been worried about lax safety precautions on the job site. So worried, in fact, that 2 or 3 days before the crash, he said to his wife, if anything happens to me, before you talk to anyone else, call Bob Habush. And that's exactly what Trish Wisher did. Bob was the lead plaintiff attorney in a negligence lawsuit filed by the 3 surviving widows against Mitsubishi Heavy Industries of America, the manufacturer of the stadium's retractable roof. Bob claimed that the company acted recklessly when it ordered the crane lift of a portion of the roof in heavy winds. To give you an idea of the horrific event and the damage to property and to life, I'll read this excerpt of the crane operator as everything around him collapsed. At 5:13 p.m. from out of nowhere, a sound like a crack of thunder ripped through the air. Workers on the ground scattered for cover. Pitching to the east, Big Blue's long boom suddenly buckled as a gust of wind caught its 450-ton load. The wind tugged at the boom until it crashed through the stadium wall and tumbled like a broken toy to the stadium floor, its load a jumbled wreck. On its descent, the boom sliced the cable that held the man basket, sending the 3 iron workers plummeting to the infield. As they fell, their screams could be heard by the crane operator, Joe Edwards, over their walkie-talkie radios. Joe, get us out of here. Get us out of here. Joe, get us out of here. As Big Blue toppled toward him, Edwards was sure he was going to die. He grabbed the control levers on the operator's cab of the smaller crane and waited for the impact. I mean, I could feel it, he said later, describing the crash. It sounded like a war zone. I could hear small pieces of iron just zinging and popping and banging and slamming. I could hear concrete exploding. I could hear the heavy iron crushing and mangling and twisting. The cab was getting beat around so bad. And I just sat there, getting ready to die. I said, I know I'm going to go away from here, and I know I ain't going to suffer, but I wonder what the hit is going to feel like. And then all of a sudden I heard this crrrr. All this iron is screeching and piling up, and just as at the last second, the piece just tailed away from my operator's section of the crane and hit behind me. I could reach out and touch that pile of mangled iron, that 60, 70-foot iron. I could lean out and touch it. I said, "Holy Christ, I lived through this." I was shocked that I was alive. Meanwhile, a mass of steel and glass and concrete was strewn across the floor of the unfinished stadium. And lying in the infield, entangled in cables and useless harnesses, were the mangled bodies of the 3 iron workers.
That that case, of course, went to trial, as Kurt said. Trial lasted 6 weeks. There was never a thought of settlement, ever. As we got closer to trial, there was lots of offers to settle the case. But like me, the widows wanted revenge. They did not want to settle. They wanted Mitsubishi to be punished. They wanted Grotlich, who was the site superintendent, who practiced unsafe conditions and work conditions over a long period of time. And so there was never any pressure on me to settle the case. And they did get their satisfaction during the cross-examination of Mr. Grotlich and the other. The interesting thing about this case was that at the beginning, they were Japanese. It's a Japanese company, Mitsubishi, and they had Japanese engineers that were involved in the construction of the roof. And the DA, Mike McCann at that time, was all over that site looking for a possible criminal prosecution. Well, the Japanese individuals, and I suspect this, got very panicked and thought they were all going to jail, and so they blamed the crane. Wasn't us, it was the crane. The crane was defective. I didn't know if the crane was defective or not. So I had one of my people in the office find me the best crane expert in the world. And they found a guy named Howard Shapiro out of New York who wrote the book. And his book was in every OSHA office and every library on cranes. I called him up, and luck would have it, he just got back from vacation. He walked in the door and picked up the phone. And I hired him on the spot after I described the situation to him. It turned out that he had the voicemail light blinking, and after he decided to represent the widows and me, he found out that several insurance companies and Mitsubishi had called him to hire him as well. It was just pure luck that I got him at that time. The success of the case was a lot based upon my investigator, Terry Tatasek, who has been responsible for a number of victories in court. He's a man of tremendous talent. He fit really nice with my obsessiveness. One case we worked on together involved a little girl who was burned up after her cotton pajamas caught fire. She was playing with a lighter. She was like 4 years old. And the cotton pajamas just burst into flame. And we found out it didn't have flame retardant in it. And so I was trying to trace out, she bought it at Kmart, took the deposition at Kmart. We never saw this pattern before, not ours. But we bought it from Gannis in New York. So then I said, okay, so we then took a deposition of Gannis in New York. Look at my books. Never saw this pattern. I think it was little elephants, as I recall, on the pajama. We had a little piece of pajama that didn't get burned. Never saw this, not us. Well, where am I going to go with this? You know, I can't prove it was sold here. I can't prove where it was manufactured. But as I'm going through all the invoices, and I have a habit of doing that, going through all the documents, I found an invoice from a place in Tennessee. I said, something's fishy here. I said, Terry, there's a factory in Tennessee. Go to Tennessee and don't come back until you find one. Right, Terry? Right. Well, he found a renegade factory in Tennessee, non-union, that has made this pajama without flame retardant. in it, where it was required, which burned this little girl horribly. So that perseverance and Terry's talent allowed us to get a nice recovery for this little girl. So to be a successful litigator, you need successful support people. A Terry Tatasak, a Ken Jarvis, a partner like Tim Trechik. You don't do it by yourself. You have to have a strong support system that helps you investigate and put these cases together. It's not the Lone Ranger. Without that support, you just don't do it. So a lot of the success that I've had in the courtroom was due to preparation with people like them who put these cases together for me.
By the time the case went to trial on October 16th, 2000, which is almost 15 years ago to the day, 100,000 documents would be gathered by his investigative team. 122 depositions were taken and dozens of witnesses were called to testify. Bob's cross-examinations of the Mitsubishi survivors was merciless. He grilled them, pummeled them with his questions until he drummed the truth out of them. When he gave his closing argument, the courtroom was standing room only. It's not profits before safety, he told the jury. It's safety before profits. And maybe, folks, maybe if the lesson is clear enough, the message is clear enough, maybe there won't be more widows. 3 more kids that have to lose their daddies or their husbands due to the outrageous conduct that we saw in this case. And then maybe the lives will not have gone in vain. Maybe some good can still come of this. I'm the voice for these men who are not here to talk to you themselves. If they were here, I'm sure they'd say thank you and place their trust and their prayers with you to do the right thing. Members of the jury, this is the kind of case this courthouse was built for. This is the kind of case that this courtroom was designed for. This is the kind of case that I became a lawyer to handle. Something special can come out of this tragedy. Some good may still come out of these losses. It's in your hands, and you can ensure and send a message so that other families will not have to have me or any other lawyer standing up here talking with you like this today. We are confident on behalf of the families that you will do the right thing. The stakes were high in this case, but Bob clearly was in his element. He was swinging for the fences on this one. This was his World Series, his Super Bowl, his Triple Crown, all rolled into one. I mean, as he said, this is what he was made to do. This was the very pinnacle of his career. The jury deliberated for 3 whole days. And when the verdict was finally read by the judge, it came down as a crescendo, totaling $99,250,000 for the 3 plaintiffs, for the wives, for the widows. In more than his 50 years as a lawyer, Bob had tried 100 cases and had won all but 3, I believe. Case after case, he was driven to make things right, driven to get even. I'll just reread a portion of that cover flap. There is no turning the other cheek. There never was, and there never will be. I think that exists today.
So we have about 7 minutes left, and I want to get to as many of these questions as we can. And some of them are really pretty sharp questions. In the course of a case, have you ever discovered something about your client or the case that made you question your client or whether you were on the right side?
Yeah. Things happen in trials that you don't always anticipate. I had a case against General Motors. It was tried in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was a nice place to try a case. It had a nice Republican federal judge appointed by former President Nixon. It had a General Motors plant in town. It had signs along the highway which said East Texans for tort reform. And when I met the judge, he says, Mr. Habush, you can't bring all your tricky stuff down here from Wisconsin. Our juries are so dumb, you can never use that stuff with them. First of all, I said, oh my God, what am I doing here? I asked everyone, who brought this crappy case in the office? And they said, you did. Anyways, we tried the case, and it was bifurcated, and we were able to win the liability case against General Motors, and it was then going to be trying the damages, and that's when my staff found out that she had had an abortion just prior to the trial. Now, the damages were going to be based upon the fact that she had pain and suffering. She was a paraplegic, so she suffered plenty. But with this Southern Baptist jury from Louisiana, I didn't think they would take kindly to her. So the General Motors guy came in, named Mike Krasmersky, who wouldn't offer me a nickel on the case. He was very unhappy that he had lost the case. So he was ready to talk settlement, and ordinarily, I would have said, stick it. Now we're not settling, you wouldn't offer me a nickel, we're going to trial. But because I found out about the client, I thought discretion was a better part of valor, and so he paid a rather substantial amount of money rather than going ahead and trying the damage case. So that's an example of finding out something a little late that affected the outcome.
What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a law student who aspires to become a courtroom avenger?
Okay. Here's the qualities. You're competitive. I don't care if you're competitive in gin rummy, in bridge, chess, or checkers, or in football, basketball, but you're competitive. You like competition. Number two, it helps to be intelligent. Number three, you have compassion and empathy for people. You've had associations with the common man and woman, not just country club sect people, regular people that work in factories and dig ditches, so that you understand what those people go through. And finally, you're not afraid to lose. You're a risk taker. And when you see an injustice, you grab a hold of it and you go all the way, and you don't let anyone else talk you out of it. Now, nowadays, it's not easy, because nowadays, unlike when I was practicing all these decades, they have mediation. We never had mediation. When judges used to tell me to settle the case, I would ignore them. I don't want to settle the case. And there's nothing they could do about it. They'd get pissed off, but there's nothing they could do about it. So now they got mediation, and the people come together with the insurance companies and the adjusters, and the defense realizes they got problems, and the plaintiffs are sitting there, and they offer them money, and the plaintiff says, I want it, even though it's maybe 10% of what they should be getting, or 50%. So mediation is the worst thing that's ever happened to people who want to be trial lawyers, who want to go to trial. So the only answer to that is to be unreasonable, at mediation. Ask for 10 times what you want. But the advice again, litigation is a great way to make a living. It's stressful, but it's rewarding, whether you're a defense lawyer or whether you're a plaintiff's lawyer. Just being in the courtroom is the greatest one-on-one intellectual experience you can have. It's better than writing wills. It's better than looking at tax returns. It's sure as hell better than doing divorce cases or defending drug drivers. So anyone here who are law students, think about being litigators, because it's the highest level, it's the major leagues of being a lawyer.
And this is maybe a follow-up question to the same question, but is there a piece of advice that the Bob Habush today would give to the younger Bob Habush based on what you know now?
The only thing I'd change in my life is the damage to our daughter, Sherry. I married a wonderful woman. We've been married 58 years. I have wonderful children. I have wonderful grandchildren. I'm a lucky man. I've lived doing things that I loved doing, and I still love doing it. I still have the same fire in my belly that I had 53 years ago. scares me. When is it going to go away? Maybe it takes some Alka-Seltzer. No, it's been great. And I don't know if you're ready to close it up. I want to thank the dean for his wonderful words, and Mark for his wonderful words, and Hannah for her wonderful words. And I want to thank them for being sponsors, all three of you. I particularly want to thank all of you. I hope that we have been somewhat entertaining and gave you an idea of what it is. But last but not least, I want to thank this man, Chandler. Yeah, I gave him a lot of stuff, but he wrote a beautiful book. He gave life to the stories. He gave passion to the stories. I could never have written about this stuff without Kurt Chandler. He's a wonderful talent, wonderful talent. I only wish this could be on the bestsellers list so people could get to know Kurt Chandler, what a wonderful writer he is. And so to you, Kurt Chandler, I say thank you. Thank you, to all of you.
Well, and our time is short, so that is the last word in this part of the program. But just a reminder, we do have a reception and a book signing about to start, I believe, in the room next door and out in the foyer there. And a heads up that the Marquette law students in attendance should already have received copies of the book that are already signed, I believe. So there should be no need for you to stand in line unless that is something you enjoy doing. I do want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, and especially the stars of our show once again, Bob Habush and Kurt Chandler, for just a thought-provoking evening.
Thank you.
Has been a thrill to be here. Do join us for the reception in just a moment, and have a great night.
Hell of a show, Bob.
Hell of a show.
I feel like I should give you the remaining index cards that we didn't get to. So you can see what was on people's minds.
Sort of souvenirs. Good job.
You too, Phil.
Really good job.
Habush, did you ever have I might have an emotional problem. Did you ever have George Siebert Baker as an expert?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
Well, he's a material scientist.
No, I don't believe so. Huh?
We gotta do it again.
Yes, we'll do it again.
Serious. We're gonna do it again.
Frank Gimble.
Mike's from you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Painless.
You're still right here all
Thank you, Betty.
even more together.
Now you gotta work on your golf game.
Forget golf.
I'll give you a business card just in case.